outcome sought by anything or anyone, in whole or in part, fails to pass the survivability and habitat sustainability test, that would be a pretty strong indication that such an activity is a non-starter and could never have had a place in an evolutionary, mature, intelligent species world. So there is your true north if ever there was one. In case of doubt, just consider what a pre-agricultural Earth might have looked like. Or to go further back, what Earth would have been like prior to the evolution of intelligent species and the emergence of Homo sapiens. Here are a few quick examples that might help one understand what might or might not pass muster in an evolutionary mature world once this test is applied. Economic policies that destroy Earth's habitats and pollute its environments, its atmosphere, and the food chain of all species in the name of economic progress, or on the premise that these enable growth and create jobs. The unconscionable inequality that's built into the political, economic, and most other aspects of modern civilization, enabling the accumulation of most of the Earth's resources by the few to the detriment of the many. Suppression of women and girls, half our species, across cultures, countries, and continents in the name of patriarchy, family honor, religion, economy, and archaic cultural beliefs and practices. Development of weapons of war and WMDs on the misguided notion of maintaining peace through strength. Enslavement of one's own species in any way, shape, or form, as Western and other civilizations have done at one time or another to most of the rest of the world. Exploiting workers by paying low, non-livable wages, and customers by exploiting their personal online habits and data without their consent, and by deceptive marketing and advertising. Should one go on? Go ahead, make your own list, and subject each item to evolution's survivability and habitat sustainability test, and see where Homo sapiens come out. Yes, it might be a bit simplistic, but it's one way to get one's own feel for how evolutionarily mature our species might be, and in which direction we might be headed. Not so well hidden amid the above perspective on what might have guided evolution in the setup of Earth life, ecosystems, and habitats might be more than a hint that the same rules and patterns can also guide an emergent intelligent species to survival. After all, if these survival principles were good enough to guide evolution in the establishment of Earth life and all that sustains it, they should be good enough to guide an emerging intelligent species to survival. In the prior chapter on survival, we took an in-depth look at some of these rules and patterns and constructed a species survival maturity model, a potential guide evolution appears to have left, which, if followed, might lead an intelligent species to survival. And if species, habitat, and intelligent species survival turns out to be the only measure of intelligent species maturity that will ultimately matter, the question must be, how does 21st century Homo sapiens measure up? One way to make that assessment is to try and estimate how far along the road to evolutionary maturity Homo sapiens has come, and how far it might yet have to travel. How many rungs might remain on the species survival maturity model before Homo sapiens reaches the survival plateau? What would an intelligent species survival scorecard that seeks to assess Homo sapiens' efforts and accomplishments look like from an evolutionary survival patterns perspective? Below is one take on how Homo sapiens measures up. It's no overstatement to note that our species does not even appear to be trying to attain evolutionary maturity. Nonetheless, it would be interesting to find out what you, dear reader, might think, particularly across generations. The greatest generation, baby boomers, generations X, Y, and Z, and millennials, as well as some of Homo sapiens' well-known futurists, techno-sapiens, and moneyed sapiens. So, here goes the world's first Homo sapiens survival scorecard. The left column lists the evolutionary survival patterns an intelligent species must successfully negotiate to survive and preserve itself, Earth's species, and habitats. In the next two columns are the required survival plateau score for each pattern, and a guess at what modern Homo sapiens might be. The trend column attempts to indicate a direction. The final column contains a few explanatory comments. However, in coming up with Homo sapiens' score, it is worth noting that unlike those Ivy League students who got in by their celebrity parents' bribes, no amount of money will buy their or their parents' survival. There is simply no way to bribe Mother Nature. Table 13.1. Homo sapiens survival scorecard based on evolutionary survival patterns. To survive, an intelligent species must evolve. This is 100% required to reach the survival plateau. Homo sapiens scores 100%. To survive, a species must have already evolved. To survive, an intelligent species must reproduce. This is 100% required to get to the survival plateau, and Homo sapiens scores 100%. But population may well be headed beyond Earth's carrying capacity. To survive, an intelligent species must sustain its habitat. This is 100% required to reach the survival plateau. Homo sapiens scores 10 to 20%. Because profits come first, there's little to no interest in habitat sustainability. To survive, an intelligent species must adapt. This is 50 to 100% required to reach the survival plateau. Homo sapiens scores 30 to 40% because of its limited ability to respond to disasters or climate change, and because Homo sapiens adaptations are rarely survival-driven. To survive, an intelligent species must innovate. This is 30 to 80% required to reach the survival plateau. Homo sapiens scores 20 to 30% because innovation is profit, not survival-driven. To survive, an intelligent species must mature. This is 100% required to reach the survival plateau, and Homo sapiens scores 20 to 50%. Note that 100% is the only acceptable score. To survive, an intelligent species must migrate. This is 100% required to get to the survival plateau. Homo sapiens scores 0%, because intra- and intersolar migration is not yet possible. To survive, an intelligent species must have a survival focus. This is 100% required to reach the survival plateau. Homo sapiens scores 10 to 20%, because Homo sapiens as a species has little to no focus on species survival. Total score required to reach the survival plateau is 7 to 800. Homo sapiens score is 260 to 350. What's conspicuously absent from the above scorecard are any of the usual measures of maturity Homo sapiens use to compare civilizations across time and among countries and peoples. There are no political, economic, military, religious, scientific, human rights, or health-related measures. No hunger, infant mortality, refugee, and migrant data. Evolution has simply set the destination and the rules to get there, and appears to have left it up to each species, as it goes about the process of living, to get to that destination by following the rules and using whatever evolutionary capabilities it has developed. For intelligent species, like Homo sapiens, that destination is evolutionary maturity, getting to that survival plateau. The rules to be followed are to live within Earth's ecosystems and habitats without destroying them, Earth's species, or itself. How much easier could evolution have made it? The scorecard takes a low Earth orbit level view of how Homo sapiens might be performing on each of the evolutionary survival patterns: adapt, innovate, mature, migrate to survive, shown in Figure 9.1, but only hints at the level of jeopardy such low scores, one person's take, might imply. While there might not be a right overall score, a low evolutionary maturity rating does not bode well, and may hint more of extinction than survival. Because evolutionary maturity is a measure of a species' ability to survive beyond the point of self-extinction, one can get a clearer sense of where Homo sapiens might stand as a species by considering its maturity/self-extinction index. This index is a correlation between a species' ability to mature and its ability to innovate. The maturity/self-extinction index indicates how close a species is to self-extinction when the index approaches 0%, and how close it is to attaining evolutionary maturity when the index approaches 100%. The higher the index, the more members of a species, as a percentage of its total population, are needed to drive itself to extinction, thus making it less likely. On the other hand, the lower the index, the fewer members of a species are needed, thus increasing the likelihood of innovation-driven self-extinction. The chart below plots Homo sapiens' maturity/self-extinction index at 3 specific points: World War I, World War II, and the Cuban Missile Crisis. These 3 points are chosen because the first 2 were the first worldwide conflicts, and the third because it threatened another worldwide war, one that for the first time might have used mainly weapons of mass destruction. Whereas a large percentage of the worldwide population was engaged in each of the world wars, the percentage of people needed to prosecute each war was significant: 3.42% and 77% respectively. The Cuban Missile Crisis, however, threatened not only another worldwide war, but this time a thermonuclear war. This innovation completely changed these percentages, exponentially reducing the number of people required to start such a conflict to near 0, due to the fact that it needed the decision of only one man, either John Kennedy or Nikita Khrushchev, because these weapons could plunge the world into a nuclear holocaust, potentially bringing on a nuclear winter that might terminate Homo sapiens' existence. Plotted across the bottom and remaining near 0, beginning with the last 2 centuries, also going back for all of Homo sapiens' existence, but shortened for ease of display, is the innovation trend showing World War I, World War II, and the Cuban Missile Crisis, with their corresponding average world population and points along this innovation plot when various inventions occurred. Most standalone innovation plots show an exponential increase in innovation, particularly during the last century, compared with the preceding millions of years of Homo sapiens' forebears' existence. However, these, in the words of Peter Diamandis in his book Abundance, tend to talk about the inventions of goods and services, food, water, education, healthcare, and energy, and rarely get around to topics such as WMDs and the innovations that specifically led to their creation. Needless to say, a singularly rosy view of reality. The maturity/self-extinction index trend is plotted above the innovation trend, showing at each of these 3 points the index at the occurrence of each event. World War I required the participation of an estimated 3.34% of a worldwide population of approximately 1.9 billion. World War II, often regarded as the deadliest human conflict, required the participation of an even greater percentage, estimated at 77% of the worldwide population of about 2.3 billion. As deadly as World War II had been, it needed orders of magnitude more people to agree to participate. The larger the number of people that must agree to participate, the less likely it is that such conflicts, given the innovations of the time, will drive self-extinction. However, with the invention of the atomic bomb and the subsequent development of thermonuclear capabilities, by the time the Cuban Missile Crisis occurred in 1962, that agree to participate percent dropped from 77% in World War II to less than 1% of the population, then estimated at 3.2 billion. Essentially, it required only the consent of one of two men, Kennedy or Khrushchev, and eliminated the need for large numbers of people to agree to participate, vastly increasing the chances of self-extinction. WMDs changed how wars are started and fought, and the number of people needed to participate in decimating vast stretches of the surface of the planet, with the potential to drive Homo sapiens to extinction. So, whereas Homo sapiens' evolutionary maturity level might have begun at or near 100%, and hovered at 90% or above for most of the millions of years of hominins' existence, and only began to decline slowly about 10,000 years ago with the arrival of agriculture and early civilizations, Homo sapiens' innovation was almost non-existent and mostly marginal for most of those millions of years. There were a few bright spots here and there, but innovation really began to accelerate only in the last 2 centuries. Upon closer inspection, an inverse growth relationship between these two patterns begins to emerge. As one begins to rise, the other begins to fall, and the transitions appear to begin at or about the same time in Homo sapiens history, suggesting a cause and effect relationship. Indeed, hidden in the opposing movements of these two plot points is a race, one that appears to pit Homo sapiens' efforts to mature against its efforts to innovate. While an increase in evolutionary maturity implies an increase in the movement toward Homo sapiens' survival, an increase in innovation strongly correlates with a decrease in the number of individuals needed for the species to drive itself to extinction, in effect saying that innovation without maturity is a prescription for self-extinction. While the population of our hunter-gatherer forebears was orders of magnitude smaller, they lacked the self-exterminating capabilities Homo sapiens possess today, and they would instead have been at risk of extinction due more to climate change and natural disasters, as is believed to have happened to the Neanderthals. Evolutionary maturity may have begun to show signs of decline for the first time with the transition to agriculture and the rise of civilization 10,000 years ago. Whereas hunter-gatherers lived most of those many millions of years within Earth's ecosystems, mostly observing the requirements not to destroy habitat, species, or themselves, post-agricultural Homo sapiens began to live outside of Earth's ecosystems, destroying Earth's habitats and species, and got off to a grand start toward destroying itself. A second important turning point seems to have occurred with the arrival of the Industrial Revolution in the mid-19th century. The emergence of an industrial economy and the transition from renewables to fossil fuels saw evolutionary maturity take a precipitous dive that continued through both world wars and the splitting of the atom, and reached a nadir with the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. October 1962 may be the point in time in which, for the first time, as far as is known, Homo sapiens' existence as a species might have come down to the whim of a single man. Precisely at that point, Homo sapiens' ability to mature and Homo sapiens' ability to innovate caught up and intersected, apparently headed in opposite directions. Our species' ability to innovate had finally surpassed its ability to mature, with potentially devastating consequences. Speaking of this event, President Kennedy is reported to have said, "Every man, woman, and child lives under a nuclear sword of Damocles, hanging by the slenderest of threads, capable of being cut at any moment by accident, or by miscalculation, or by madness." Since that fateful time, because of our innovations, Homo sapiens has lived in a WMD era, shown shaded on the chart as the beginning of Homo sapiens' self-extinction capable era, with the constant risk of self-extinction in the hands of a single member of our species. Yet we have shown little desire to back away from the edge of this self-extinction precipice. On the contrary, as the chart shows, our species has added to the WMD era numerous other terrifying and innovative ways to drive itself to extinction. Yet it would be a mistake to condemn all forms of innovation, as not all are misguided. Indeed, if innovations were intrinsically bad, could be used to drive a species toward self-extinction only, along with its habitat and other species, one doubts evolution would have evolved intelligent species with the capability to innovate. Clearly, then, there might have been another intent, an evolutionary survival intent, that would not have included motives like profit, economic growth, and personal gain that drive innovation today. Rather, it seems the reason this capability evolved was to enable an evolutionary maturing intelligent species to invent and innovate solutions to avoid the destruction of life by the universe's existential threats, such as what took out the dinosaurs. An evolutionary mature intelligent species would use its innovative abilities to preserve life, not destroy it. Innovation may have been intended to be survival-driven rather than profit-driven, an ability a mature intelligent species could use to preserve species, habitats, and itself. Perhaps the ability to innovate was specifically intended to come up with the means to ultimately enable intra- and intersolar survival migrations, something neither the dinosaurs nor any other non-intelligent species could or will ever be able to do. And that right there, dear reader, may well hint at an answer to the question we asked at the beginning of this book. Why, after more than 4 billion years, did intelligent species, and thereby Homo sapiens, finally evolve? It is sad to see that which evolution may well have intended to be used to escape death, instead is used by Homo sapiens to bring upon itself and all species the prospect of death and self-extinction. But this is a book about survival, so I invite you to join me in imagining how different our world would be if these overarching evolutionary principles, intended to guide intelligent species to evolutionary maturity and survival, drove Homo sapiens' civilization, instead of the current selfish pursuit of profits, gain, growth, and greed. As one contemplates our plight and wishes for change, there are several aspects of this world and the civilization Homo sapiens has built that would find little or no parallel in an evolutionary mature intelligent species world. While one would expect many things in a world built by a mature version of ourselves to be different in many ways, those differences would still have to satisfy that survivability and habitat sustainability test. One way to begin to wrap one's head around these concepts is to imagine examples of familiar Homo sapiens views, practices, expectations, and long-standing beliefs and norms, and how they might fit into a civilization built by an evolutionary, mature, intelligent species. The following are some areas of divergence between these two worlds. One would be hard-pressed to envision how any of the familiar practices below could possibly exist in a world built by an intelligent species whose highest priority is species, habitat, and Homo sapiens survival. In most respects, such a civilization would seem unrecognizable, if not actually alien. The notion of ownership. This idea is so ingrained, yet it would be untenable in a mature, intelligent species world. Communal use of a resource instead of exclusive ownership rights is the evolutionary model. Nothing, it would seem, with the exception of mates and offspring and dwelling places such as nests, holes, dens, caves, and lairs, was owned exclusively in a pre-intelligent species world. Rather, resources were available for all to use freely. For all but the last 10,000 of the 300,000 years of Homo sapiens evolution, hunting animals and gathering foodstuffs was the sole means of subsistence. Food was regarded as a common resource and was available to all members of the group. There was no concept of food ownership. The notion of ownership appears to have emerged sometime after 10,000 years ago, with the gradual transition from hunting and gathering to agriculture and settled communities. There could be no eminent domain, no government lands, no national spheres of influence, no private parks or beaches or forests, and so on. The current move toward a sharing economy holds potential for a return to that state, were that brave new evolutionary mature species world to emerge. The notion of want versus need. There is a sense in the natural world of taking only what one needs, and not hoarding to the exclusion and injury of others, or with the intention of creating artificial scarcity or gaining a monopoly position. The biblical story of Israel in the wilderness being provisioned with just enough manna to last one day, except on the day before the Sabbath, seems to make the point. Haven't you noticed that there is no way to collect and own the most basic things of life? Air, sunlight, and water, though some have found ways to sell even water. Economic systems built around greed, accumulation of personal, corporate, regional, and national wealth, and rewarding shareholders and investors with profits to the exclusion of all others, could not exist. Private enterprise could not exist unless it could be made to serve the needs of all. No one gets or wants first dibs on anything in such a world. The notion that the value of a species or its individual members is based on some economic factor. The concept of quantifying and measuring everyone and everything on the basis of economic, and therefore monetary, value could not exist in a world that places species survival, maturity, and habitat sustainability above all else. Survival, sustainability, and maturity are the coins of this new realm. There would be no haves or have-nots. There would be no social, political, economic, monetary, or other system in which 8 mostly old, white American men could possibly own as much as 50% of the world's resources. There would be no income inequality and no discrimination of any kind. There could be no situation in which the majority of the world's people live on less than $10 a day, while the wealthy splurge and the middle class just manages to make ends meet. The very notion of wealthy versus middle class versus poor could not exist in an evolutionarily mature world. Bias and inequality on the basis of income, race, ethnicity, gender, or sexual orientation would not exist. The concept of capitalism. The idea of a market economy consisting of independent actors driven by their own enlightened self-interest, aka capitalism, could not exist in a mature intelligent species world. Imagine no stock market, no money, bitcoins, or financial markets, no money center banks, no sovereign, corporate, or private funds, no taxes and tax havens, nobody wealthy or super wealthy scooping up and commandeering the world's resources for profit, while leaving the poor to deal with the environmental consequences. Imagine the equivalent of a basic living wage that ensures there could be no poverty and no homelessness. It is singularly difficult to imagine a 21st century Homo sapiens civilization devoid of capitalism and the market economy, with its banking, money, stock, interest rate, and commodity markets and worldwide trading mechanisms, instruments, and infrastructure. Yet it is this Homo sapiens innovation that has elevated money, profits, and corporate and personal financial outcomes over all else, even the survival of life itself. But difficult as it may be to imagine a world without capitalism, life went on just fine without it for all species for billions of years, and for the almost 3 million years of existence of hunter-gatherer earlier hominins and Homo sapiens. Capitalism and other economic systems that place economic development, endless financial growth, profits, and other financial rewards over species and habitat survival, leading to habitat and species exploitation, death, or extinction, could not exist in an evolutionary mature species world. Evolution evolved a world filled with continuous evolution, life, and wonders, with renewable, sustainable habitats, intended for the survival of and use by all species, free of charge. But, as in the movie Avatar, Homo sapiens showed up like an invasive species and slapped a price tag on everyone and everything and declared a Black Friday sale, the likes of which Amazon and Walmart could only dream. But in the movie, things did not work out quite the way the invading capitalists had hoped. Instead, they got their asses kicked something awful and fled Pandora with their tails between their feet, as it were. If the rush to bring economic development, with its attendant species and habitat destruction, to Greenland and the Arctic regions is any indication, capitalist Homo sapiens will, unless stopped, continue, like armies of marching locusts, to the end of the galaxy. Thankfully, evolution has different plans if Homo sapiens is unable to change its course. One wonders how much of a metaphor for Homo sapiens' current rape of our planet, its species, and its resources Avatar writer and director James Cameron intended, and the message he hoped to convey. One suspects it may turn out to be much more prophetic than anyone yet imagines. The only question that remains is, are Homo sapiens going to wise up and convert before it's too late, as Jake Sully and Grace did in the film, or are we planning to check out like Colonel Miles? The notion of warfare as an unavoidable element of a modern Homo sapiens civilization. The justifications for war, death, and destruction to achieve a species' goals are diametrically opposed to the requirement of species survival. An evolutionary mature species could not give rise to such leaders as Kim Jong-un, Adolf Hitler, Mao Zedong, or many others, equally bad or worse, that an immature Homo sapiens civilization, despite all its accomplishments and innovations, has produced. There could never come a day in a mature intelligent species world when either of two white men, sitting at a G20 conference, can unleash a nuclear winter and global mass extinction should he wake up on the wrong side of the bed one day. Only in an intelligent but immature species civilization Can a Syrian dictator arise to murder 500,000 of his own people and drive millions of them to seek shelter in other countries? And only in such a civilization could the Syrian despot find support from other despots. In today's Homo sapiens world, nations are not admired for their humane and wise laws and practices, or for their care and concern for those nations in less fortunate economic conditions, but for the power of their military, the numbers, yield, and range of their WMDs, and their economic clout on the world stage. Today, he who owns WMDs rules, as demonstrated by Vladimir Putin's recent boasts/threats about his new, and he believes, unstoppable WMD delivery systems. The blood spilled by innumerable wars of aggression and conquests to acquire more and more territories and possessions stains much of Homo sapiens history. In commemorating the 100th anniversary of the First World War, French President Emmanuel Macron noted, "For 4 years, Europe almost committed suicide. Humanity had sunk into a hideous labyrinth of merciless battles, in a hell that engulfed all fighters, whichever side they were on, whatever nationality they had. 10 million dead, 6 million injured and mutilated, 3 million widows, 6 million orphans, and millions of civilian victims." In light of the stark, naked aggression of Homo sapiens during prior millennia, time spent languishing in the wastelands of immaturity, it would seem incredible to an evolutionary mature Homo sapiens civilization that powerful 21st century nation-states would squabble over tiny islands in the South China Sea, or that Jews and Palestinians, at war since 1948, still find it impossible to peacefully share a common homeland on a planet that was intended for use by all. There could be no armies, air forces, space forces, or navies, no weapons, no genocides, holocausts, or innumerable unmarked mass graves, no rivers and fields littered with buried, unexploded ordnance, and no Aboriginal people's ancestral land poisoned by spent or active uranium mines and other dangerous chemicals. The military-industrial complex and economic resources dedicated to all military budgets would not exist, as these resources would be used to meet the survival needs of a species. With a fair and equitable distribution of the Earth's resources, no terrorists, jihadists, people and drug smugglers, drug addicts, or drug dealers would exist. There would be little to no crime, and little to no need for prisons. And if there were, these would focus on rehabilitation, not punishment. There would be no police or law enforcement, and black people who have spent their lives in torment by this arm of the state would finally be able to walk the streets and drive a car without being in constant fear of being killed because they're black. Imagine, no Second Amendment, no guns, no gun crime, no gun laws, no gun lobbies, no homicides. Most nations, if they still existed in their current borders in such a world, would be unrecognizably different and finally freed from the vexing problems that plague them today. The notion that there is a need for rulers. An inexorable trend as a result of accelerating technologies and innovations is the amazing disappearance of the middleman and of work. Social scientists are beginning to reimagine a world with fewer and fewer people required to get more and more done. A soon-to-be casualty of this technological progress is the taxicab driver. Emerging technologies like blockchain, robotics, and AI threaten to retire significant portions of the working middle class and the poor. Is it too much to expect a time when, like capitalism's so-called invisible hand, Homo sapiens will one day also be able to fire all politicians, Supreme Court and other judges, and eventually the entire ruling class. Can one envision a world devoid of presidents, kings and queens, and others that comprise the ruling class? Not because of accelerating Homo sapiens technologies, but because of the evolutionary principles and practices that prevail in a mature intelligent species world. At first, this might seem like anarchy, but it would only be anarchy in an evolutionary immature world, such as exists today. The existence of rulers is perhaps a consequence of an immature emerging intelligent species. Most species of the natural world that evolved in an a priori state of evolutionary maturity have no such rulers. Consider the words of Solomon in Proverbs chapter 6 verses 6 through 8 of the NIV, or New International Version. Go to the ant, consider its ways and be wise. It has no commander, no overseer or ruler, yet it stores its provisions in summer and gathers its food at harvest. There could be no emperors, kings, queens, dictators, oligarchs, strongmen, presidents, prime ministers, popes, archbishops, or other so-called leaders who exist mostly for their own benefit or the perpetuation of their institutions. They have been over time the initiators of most wars and, in general, are a hindrance rather than a help to the people they claim to serve. Anyone who has read about or lived through the nuclear standoff between Kennedy and Khrushchev during the Cuban Missile Crisis, or is witnessing today the drama between Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un, understands the danger of entrusting the survival of an entire species to a few men. Today's those few men include Trump, Putin, Xi Jinping, and Kim Jong-un, to name a few, and the wonderful species-exterminating technologies some proud techno-sapiens espouse. Many of the institutions Homo sapiens have come up with to govern their affairs have also failed abysmally. Most forms of government, sooner or later, turn out to be platforms of power from which ambitious, dictatorial rulers can amass enormous wealth and wield the power of the state to suppress anyone who dares challenge them. Governments have become vehicles for empowering the rich and famous and multinational corporations, as well as being an arm of the military. Indeed, democracy, once hailed as the worst form of government except for all the others, a saying often attributed to Winston Churchill, who quoted it but did not create it, is routinely hijacked by wealthy, powerful corporations, myopic political parties, corporate lobbyists, and corrupt politicians, more concerned about remaining in office than representing the people. More recently, democracy has been compromised by the ability of foreign nations to thwart the will of the people by cyber manipulation of the very fundamentals of democracy, the right and freedom to vote and elect leaders of one's choice. Congressional and representative bodies in many democracies the world over have become rubber stamps for corporate written regulations that have proven to be harmful to the health of their populations. Many elected leaders have become the arm of the ruling class, serving to endorse not what's best for the people, but the agendas of their own political parties, brazenly flouting some of the most deeply held tenets of a democracy, like freedom of expression and freedom of the press. An independent judiciary and a free press are fast becoming optional extras in democracies, as countries like Poland, Hungary, and Turkey have shown. And the U.S. might not be too far behind. The notion of the need for religion. Can religion make it in a mature, intelligent species world? Can one imagine a world free from religion? No churches, mosques, temples, or synagogues? Not too many people these days seriously think religion will save the world. Some religions inspire unconditional kindness, love, forgiveness, and fairness to all. Others have inspired great art, architecture, and music. Others still have given rise to charities and humanitarian groups. Yet their teachings are routinely ignored by most, and in some religions they are being hijacked and weaponized to inspire terrorism. Religions, another product of an immature Homo sapiens mind, meant to cure Homo sapiens of its immaturity, seem to have failed. Hunter-gatherer Homo sapiens managed quite well without them, and despite the last 7,000 or so years with them, Homo sapiens have not gotten better, but some would argue have grown worse. Beyond this, over the course of history, organized religions have led wars, inspired anarchy and rebellions, and have been and still are a source of moral bankruptcy, discrimination against women, and sexual violence against minors. They have historically been inhibitors of new knowledge and emerging social norms. Some would claim they have been sources of division, pain, and suffering, and have degenerated into nothing more than another kind of political organization. Given that evolution has gone to such lengths to ensure species survival, by giving the ability to all species to reproduce, how can any form of religion that inhibits or forbids this most fundamental of evolutionary prerequisites for species survival have any place in a survival-driven, evolutionary, mature, intelligent species world? The notion that survival and habitat sustainability can be ignored without consequences. Evolutionary species survivability and habitat sustainability are cornerstone principles in an evolutionary, mature, intelligent species civilization. Can one imagine a world whose habitats, species, oceans, atmosphere, and environment are free from these scourges Homo sapiens has inflicted on them since its appearance as a species? Concepts such as habitat sustainability may seem like liberal, scientific, left-wing thinking, but evolution was in that environment sustainability camp long before environmentalists and climate scientists even existed. In a mature, intelligent species world, there could be no activity, economic or otherwise, that would drive global warming, raise ocean temperature, bleach the Earth's coral reefs, scar the landscape, deforest vast areas, spill vast amounts of oil into the oceans and rivers, pollute water sources, and create oxygen-depleted dead zones by dumping or allowing to leach into them industrial and agricultural fertilizers, pesticides, herbicides, chemical residues, and other runoff. Neither would we be faced with oceans that contain more plastic than fish. Those who make products that destroy pollinators, such as bees, would not simply be out of business in such a world, but might even be held for crimes against humanity, the environment, and species survival. Similarly, companies that routinely and with impunity concoct all kinds of chemicals and food additives that are often unfit for use by humans, and persuade regulatory bodies to approve them for the sake of profit, simply could not exist. There would be no dynamite fishing or hunting whales and other endangered marine species to extinction. There would be no poaching or recreational hunting or trade in wildlife for any purpose. The notion that migration is a threat and should be discouraged, hindered, or stopped altogether. Can one imagine a world where fleeing, destitute migrants are welcome everywhere? In a universe that mandates species migration as a basic prerequisite for survival, and that assumes species have the freedom and ability to migrate, and in light of Homo sapiens' history of migrating across the planet to survive, What is one to think and feel about modern Homo sapiens' attitudes toward migration? What would happen to the wildebeests, zebras, elephants, and countless animal, fish, and bird species if their ability to migrate to survive were to be blocked by tanks, barbed wire fences, and border troops? How does one fit into a mature, intelligent species world the current response and attitudes of nations and peoples toward modern-day Homo sapiens migrants, fleeing, for example, Central American countries or Africa, as our early forebears also had to do 70,000 years ago? Such attitudes would be simply unimaginable and could never take root in the hearts and minds of an evolutionary mature Homo sapiens civilization. The notion of inequality of the sexes. Equality of the sexes and the role of females are unquestioned ideas in a mature, intelligent species civilization. Can one imagine a world wherein females, the life-bearing members of our species, become the center and nexus of all Homo sapiens life and civilization? There is not a single person alive today, geneticists say, that cannot trace their very existence back to a single black African female and her daughters down through time. Homo sapiens wouldn't be here but for her. And yes, she was black. And how do we honor her daughters? The same way Homo sapiens today honors its birthplace and the peoples of its birthplace, with human trafficking, slavery, rape, prostitution, genital mutilation, abductions, domestic violence, inequality in the workplace, and unequal pay for equal work. The hideousness of male domination and bigotry, and the disrespect, humiliation, and sexual violence heaped upon women and girls in many countries and cultures, justified by government, religion, and superstition, underscores the true depth of current Homo sapiens immaturity and can only exist in an evolutionary immature Homo sapiens world. Only among this so-called intelligent Homo sapiens species, this third chimpanzee, is such behavior found. Contrast this behavior with that of bonobos, thought to be the nicest primates on the planet, so much so they make humans look like monsters. And while they are like a distant relative whose photo one might not want to keep in the family album, the difference can leave one wondering which one the true intelligent species is. There is, sadly, probably no end to the ways modern Homo sapiens civilization would differ from what one might find in an evolutionary, mature, intelligent species world, built around the perspective of species survival, habitat sustainability, and evolutionary maturity. These random items above expose the deep contrast between the civilizations immature Homo sapiens, the lone remaining intelligent species, has built, and the kind a mature intelligent Homo sapiens species, reaching for evolutionary maturity, might hopefully yet attain. Unpacking the former to create the latter would make the Brexit talks between Great Britain and the European Union seem like a brief chat over afternoon tea. There are other ways of measuring Homo sapiens' progress, but these are unlikely to indicate its maturity or ability to avoid self-extinction and survive. The following are classifications some scientists think describe an advanced civilization. There are 3 such classifications that have gained some level of currency. These are the Kardashev scale, which ranks civilizations based on their energy consumption, and Carl Sagan's information mastery scale, which ranks them according to their information consumption, and more recently, the Social Progress Index, or SPI, which measures the extent to which countries provide for the social and environmental needs of their citizens. None of these scales is a measure of Homo sapiens' maturity or ability to achieve survival. Rather, they measure its ability to innovate and consume the planet's, solar systems, and galactic resources. But we already know where that leads. The Kardashev scale classifies advanced civilizations into 3 types, where Type 1 would be able to utilize all the solar light available on the planet. Type 2 would be able to use all the energy emanating from its host star. And Type 3 would be able to harness all the energy in its host galaxy. Using this scale, a Type 1 advanced civilization in our solar system will have the ability to utilize as much as 7 × 10⁻17 watts. Since this has been calculated to be about 100,000 times Earth's current energy consumption, Earth would merely qualify as a Type 0+ to a Type 0.7 by some calculations, and about 100 to 200 years away from becoming a Type 1. A Type 2 advanced civilization would be one capable of using the entire solar energy output of its host star. Assuming one the size of the Sun, it would be capable of consuming 4 × 10⁻26 watts. It could take Earth a few thousand years to become a Type 2. Some believe it could take Earth as long as 1 million years to become a Type 3 advanced civilization, one with the ability to consume all the energy in a host galaxy. The Milky Way galaxy is estimated to output 4 × 10⁻37 watts. The Carl Sagan scale ranked advanced civilizations alphabetically and considered a Type A as capable of consuming 1 million bits of information, and a Type B consuming 10 times as much, all the way up to a Type Z. Earth's current information consumption would position it as a Type H civilization. The Social Progress Index, or SPI, which measures the extent to which countries provide for the social and environmental needs of their citizens, while a vast improvement beyond the prior 2 scales, falls short as well because of its near-exclusive focus on human progress. But what do any of these rankings and classifications mean? Other than possible measures of our species' scientific, technological, and social advancement, they say little about our maturity. And, as we have seen, it is the measure of our maturity as a species that will ultimately determine whether or not we survive. At best, these scales as measures of our scientific, technological, and social advancement are inadequate, if not misleading, as they are unable to give any indication of whether we will use these to advance our chances of survival or accelerate the time to our extinction. If one must have such a scale, then it would seem such a scale should measure our ability to mature and survive as a species. And if so, then shouldn't one consider instead an evolutionary maturity scale? So, using a similar advanced civilization classification scale structure, here is how such a scheme might look from an evolutionary